started, I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for everyone to just, sort of soak up as much as they can from these three. Um, Real quick, so the event, I just want to run through what we're going to be covering over the next 3 days. And then we're just going to get to have as much conversation as possible today. So today, this conversation today is going to be focused around crossing the chasm. So crossing the chasm, what we're going to talk about more is like what the journey has been like for Ian, Jamal, Brandon. What's the journey been like crossing from 6 to 7 figures? And for those of you asking, the call is going to be 60 minutes today. It'll be recorded. We'll send it out afterwards. There'll be a replay. We'll get it to you. What we're going to talk about next week is more outbound. So breaking through, getting that first appointment. And then in week 3 on the 28th there, we'll talk more about running the sales motion. So that's what we're going to be covering today. What I want to do real quick is just introduce these three, and then we're going to get right to it. So Ian Koniak, we got him on the call. He spent close to 9 years at Salesforce, where he was a #1 rep and hit almost 400% of quota 2 years in a row. And Ian, you're just launching your coaching business, right? I think on Monday, dude. So you work with account executives. Congrats on that. That's super cool. Jamal, he's going to tell us a little bit more about where he's hanging out right now. I think you guys would be excited about that. But Jamal has been a career enterprise seller for over 20 years. And really where he spent a lot of his time was on these mega deals. The first mega deal he closed was in 2012 with Oracle, and it was $50 million. Jamal's also got a great business and a mega deal masterclass where he helps account executives and reps land some of these larger deals. And then last but not least, and we'll be done. I'll be done embarrassing these guys by hyping them up and talking about all their accomplishments. Brandon has sold over $50 million in SaaS sales by closing transformation deals with some of the world's largest brands at LivePerson. So he entered the 7-figure annual earners club back in 2019, and Brandon's got a cool business as well. So without further ado, I got your guys' intros. Hopefully didn't embarrass you guys too much by talking about all your accomplishments. I know that's a little awkward, but we started talking before we launched this about abundance. And for those of you that have questions, keep them coming in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. We definitely want this to be pretty interactive. But we talked about this sort of mindset of abundance, and I think it would be kind of interesting maybe to talk about, like, why would someone want to earn more money? I know that might be kind of obvious, but money's kind of one of those things that's sometimes a taboo topic that people don't like to talk about. And I'll sort of throw this question your way first, Jamal. How do you think about abundance and what, learning how to, really close some of these larger deals, grow your income? Like, what has that done in terms of abundance? How do you think about that?
I think there's two sides of that coin. One is, as you're going through your career, you're getting better, more or less on the rocky road every year, and at some point you reach a level. We're all on this journey of mastery, and we go from the understanding something in a hypothetical way to understanding it in a practical way to becoming good at it, and then further we get toward mastery. And at some point on that journey, we begin to feel at least somewhat competent and somewhat comfortable. And at that point, we can start to let go of the reins that we've been holding on so tight. And it's, in my experience, that was a huge trigger to help me move from, a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. That general feeling of, okay, now I'm good enough that I know that I'm going to be okay. And that's the one side of the coin when I think about abundance versus scarcity. The other side is, as you're climbing that mountain, when you're at the beginning, very often we're in the scarcity mindset because we don't have much, we don't have anything. And we were talking about abundance before the call started, and if you'll allow it, I'll, for a minute or so, I'll kind of tell the story about what really hit me, and that what still hits me today is that my first experience with sales was selling books door to door. And the reason that I was doing that is because my parents were doing development work in Africa, and I lived there with them for 3 years. And it was in South Africa, and at that time, the South African rand had plummeted. my family savings was basically had extremely little value, so my parents couldn't help me with college. And I found myself a freshman at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with like $100 in my account. And I went to go get student aid, and they said, "Sure, you can have a few thousand. It'll arrive in 6 weeks." So with about $100 in my account, I had to make it 6 weeks until that first check came. And if there's any UNC folks on the call, they'll know that the most famous chicken place on Franklin Street was called Time Out, and they used to make these chicken biscuits by ripping off a breast of chicken from the bone and putting them on a biscuit. They would sell those leftover bones. They called them bones for 10 cents. And I basically lived on 2 bones, a plain biscuit, and a glass of water for dinner for almost 6 weeks. And during that time, I still gets me. I knew what it was like to not have, to be in a mode of scarcity. And then I got this job selling books door to door. And the first year sucked, but then I got better and better. And by the end of my time selling books to pay for college, I got really, really good at it. And sometimes it's that fear or that knowledge or that experience of going through a real time of scarcity that completely motivates us to move through whatever difficulty we're going through or whatever hurdle in our path. So sorry, that was a little bit long, but 2 sides of the coins. And I can tell you right now, all of us can get to that abundancy mindset and a life of abundance when we keep pushing.
Yeah. Woo, man, getting it started with a bang. Really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that. And I think one thing that all 3 of you have in common, when we first started planning this, you said, "Hey, I really want to make sure that we talk about how we're all just ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we all have these stories of failure." And Ian, I want to kind of kick it your way next. You missed quota 3 years in a row. Was this during your time at Salesforce? Maybe kind of bring us back to a time where things weren't quite as abundant, as they are now.
As Jamal was talking, I was thinking of that. There's financial scarcity where we experience firsthand what it's like not to have. And then there's mental scarcity where we experience what it's like to not feel worthy because we're not performing to our potential. And for me, that was where I hit my rock bottom in Salesforce. I had always been someone who prided myself on being a top performer. I came from selling copiers and was their #1 AE sales manager and director for 10 years. I go to Salesforce and I'm the hardest worker in the company. I really was. And I grinded and I pushed myself. I actually got lucky my first year. I hit Rookie of the Year, found a big deal. And then the 3 years after that, I fell on my face hard. And that 3rd year was the hardest by far because the first 2 years I missed it. I was on an enterprise team. I only had a couple accounts. And I had a really tough boss to work for. And I said, you know what? This isn't me. It's my accounts, it's my boss, it's my territory. I'm going to change my situation. So I moved to commercial. And I said, I'm the transactional guy. I'm the guy who can, work hard and hit plan. And that last year, I finished at 95%. And I had given everything I had. I had worked harder than ever. I had changed teams. I had a good boss. I had a good territory. And I still missed it the last day of the fiscal year. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and I screamed at the top of my lungs with a pulsing headache. It was 11 p.m. on January 31st, 2017. And I remember looking at myself and not even recognizing myself and thinking I was nothing. And I was in so much pain because I had failed now and I only had myself to blame. I had changed my situation. I'd worked my hardest and I still missed it barely. And that was the moment. That was the moment I said, never again. I will never have this feeling again in my life because it hurts so much. And that was my crossing the chasm moment. So that scarcity was not a financial scarcity. It was a scarcity of worth, of self-worth. that I had to go through to really transform myself to become who I am today. 5 years ago, it's been.
Wow. One quick follow-up to that is it sounds like a big theme there was you had a moment where you really took ownership. Did you go through a period where maybe you didn't want to take ownership or it was hard to take
The first 2
responsibility?
years I missed it. Yeah, that's right. The first 2 years, it was point the finger, my territory, my boss, my company. Oh, I was about to leave Salesforce. But the third year, like I said, I changed the situation. And that's when I realized, hey, maybe it's you. Maybe the man in the mirror is not the person that you really think you are. And that was the time when I realized, like, it was the most humbling experience to let your ego go and say, you know what, I need help. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And that's really where the foundation of growth began for me.
Oof, man. Brandon.
Yeah.
Tough facts to follow here, dude.
Hard to follow
what-
these guys. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about, I know your sort of background, you didn't really want to be in sales, professional soccer, full-time DJ. And in one of your first sales roles, I know you had shared with me that you only sold 2 print ads in your first 6 months,
Yeah.
on the job. But give us a little bit more about your kind of background and what was that crossing the chasm moment like for you?
Yeah, I don't know that it was a single event, to be honest with you. I think it was a buildup of multiple things, of unlocking something that I knew deep down inside. I had strong belief that I could do big things. Didn't know what they were. And going back to my youth, particularly in high school, I focused on one thing. At the time, it was soccer. And I thought I was good. And it really wasn't until I got to college when I realized, hey, I was good in high school. I was good in my area. But when I got to a top program collegiately, I didn't start my first 2 seasons. But I had this belief. I could do some big things. So I think for me, crossing the chasm was tapping into that inner belief system and starting with scarcity. And, like Jamal was saying, sometimes you have to be, put yourself or be pushed up against the wall, either factors beyond your control, like not having financial means or not having the mental mechanisms, the coping mechanisms, like Ian was alluding to realize the power that we have is within ourselves to change the conditions around us. So I think it starts inside before you can change the outside world. So I got a little, I look at it like a seed in a garden, and I watered a little bit of it in my soccer career. And I was okay putting myself in uncomfortable positions. I went to a top collegiate program, fortunately did not succeed there, but somehow worked really hard in the off season, so hard that I landed with a professional club in Eastern Europe. And here I was, a non-starter for the first 2 seasons, leaving early to take a jump at trying my luck in Europe, trying to play catch up to these European players who were far more advanced technically than me. And I relied on my work ethic. And so I sort of built this foundation of discipline that's been, a strong pillar of mine, throughout my career. So I relied on that. Unfortunately, it put me into a tough situation where I got an injury because I was overworking myself to try to catch up. But it was a lesson that, hey, putting myself in an uncomfortable position, I knew I could try to at least strive for it because I didn't want to have regrets. So that was the first, I guess, crossing the chasm moment, is I could be okay not starting or not winning the contract, but I wouldn't be okay not putting in the discipline and the work to at least go for it. And then because of the injury issues that landed me to explore other things, didn't start my career in sales. I started with a soccer education startup. I was training youth players, and I learned a thing or two about selling there. Even though I wasn't actively selling, the first thing I learned was the best way to sell is to not sell, is to just be your authentic self. And then I did, though, want to pursue another passion of mine. Behind me, a pair of turntables. Here I came up against the scarcity of not having enough income, a poverty income level in New York City as a 20-something. So I needed a new skill to pay the rent. And I really loved music. And so I taught myself how to DJ. And that did actually end up landing me an account management role at this guy's DJ school, Jam Master Jay of Run DMC. He co-founded a Scratch DJ Academy. I learned how to DJ there, and that landed me into my first role selling, but ran into some financial issues, had to declare bankruptcy. My wife and I met in New York. We started over in a small town in Florida. And that brings me to like my first sales failure, learning how to go to local businesses, bars. I was selling for a small local newspaper, and I couldn't make it. I sold only 2 ads in the first handful of months, and I knew I was about to get fired. And luckily made the jump before that occurred. But learned a lot throughout those milestones, and then the scarcity mindset started to grow into more of an abundance mindset because I tapped into that inner belief system.
That's great, Brandon. I want to kind of pose a question to you guys here, because scarcity is a really like a common theme that you guys have talked about. And I also see a lot of people talking about it in the chat. And if you guys have any questions, again, feel free to drop into the Q&A. But Matt Moxe, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there, asked, are all of you grateful for the times of scarcity? What ways did those times change you, your perspective? Do they move you to be a more empathetic mindset? I think a thing that we'd love to know is when you're in a place of scarcity where you don't have this maybe runway, whether it be financially or scarcity around your mindset, like Ian talked about, what do you guys do in those moments to kind of keep moving and stay positive and to take ownership? What do you guys do in those moments? Go ahead, Jamal. Looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah. So again, before the call, we were talking about scarcity and abundance, and I was saying, some of the most successful people in the world are acting out on scars that they received as children. Either a parent was either could be abusive or negligent or what have you, and so for the rest of their lives, they might be straddled with this feeling of I'm not good enough. And then Ian talked about the scarcity mentality in terms of worth. These kinds of things, although they're what we suffer growing up, not necessarily only in childhood, but they can be massive drivers. And all of us suffer in this world, and all of us can use the sufferings that we've gone through as motivators for a better today and tomorrow. And I think that's huge. I mean, I still think about that period of time that I went through, physical or financial scarcity, because now I know what that's like, and I never want to be there again. And now I also know what it's like to do the things that I need to do to never put myself in that position again. And once you set up those habits, that mindset and those habits to never go to that dark situation again, you can just propel yourself forward to the point where you kind of get over that summit for the first time. And it's like, I don't know if everybody calls it this, but like the abundancy summit. As soon as you get to this, the very top, you can kind of look over into that valley and see abundance for the first time. And you're like, holy cow, I never knew that existed. I was always in this valley of scarcity. And then, but once you get there, you see it, you experience it, you just want to stay there. So having knowledge of the world of scarcity and bringing yourself to the world of abundance is a beautiful, it's a transformation that all of us can go through.
Yeah, I want to just piggyback on that if I could. When I was living in Europe and kind of challenged with trying to figure out how was I going to win this professional contract and compete with these players who were far superior. Maybe organically, I was drawn to Eastern philosophy, and I started picking up books because I had a lot of time on my hands. We would train for an hour and a half, typically in the morning, have lunch together as a team, and then train again maybe in the afternoon. And I picked up a book around Buddhism that was written by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he was a super wise leader. There was something that stood with me for a really long time. How do you know you're made out of gold until you're melted a little bit? And I think that's really the power of understanding of that, crossing the chasm from scarcity to abundance in anything, economic, mindset, love, whatever it is. You kind of have to go through that melting period to unlock the gold, so to speak. And I think looking back on, all three of us could really look back on those challenging moments to say, yeah, we can have gratitude, and actually leading with gratitude and being appreciative every single day empowers you to show up and do your best work, whether that's selling really large mega deals, showing up for your family, you name it.
I have another quote that comes to mind. Short answer is every day, because the failures keep you humble. The failures are what makes you realize who you are. And the minute our ego gets too big, that's when we fall hard. That's when the world comes crashing around us. And I've gone through that firsthand on my personal life. When I was making millions of dollars, when I was the top performer, my ego got ahead of me and it hurt me in the family side. And I nearly lost everything. I won't get into too many details here, but the quote that comes to mind is, the problem is the gift. And I'll give you a quick story. I hit top performer in Salesforce 2 years in a row, killed it. Decided I was going to teach people, start my own personal business and teach people how to sell at the highest level. Started a side hustle, started doing really well there. Thought I was God's gift to the world. My ego got so high, and I started, it shames me to talk about, because I started distancing myself from my family because I wanted more time to work on me and my business and inflate my ego, that I wasn't around as much. And I was neglecting the people that I loved, that cared about, that really were foundational to my success. And my wife noticed. And I had been living an addictive life. Let's just put it that way. I was addicted to success, but I also had physical addictions too. And in February of 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I came clean to my wife. And I say, regardless of your spiritual beliefs, I believe in God heavily, and something was calling me. God was calling me to come clean and share a little bit with my wife. And that was another rock bottom. That was a humbling moment. And that got me into recovery for addiction. And it's been over 2 years since I've gotten drunk, smoked pot, viewed pornography, taken Adderall, gambled, you name it. I used to do it. 2 years. So the past 2 years have been the most humbling experience. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I know firsthand, has nothing to do with sales, that if I didn't make foundational changes, I would have lost that which mattered most. And every day I'm grateful. It was the hardest time in my life. It was the most painful. My wife left me briefly, but if that hadn't happened, I would never be able to stand and help other people the way I can help them now, not just in sales, but in their personal lives, because I had to go through it myself. So every day I'm grateful for not only the sales hardships, but the personal hardships that have made me grow stronger and fulfill what I believe is my mission. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And I tell my wife that I would never want to put her through that in a million years, but I am so happy that we went through that, because now I have nothing to hide. They say the freest man in the world is the one with nothing to hide. And that's the gift. Yeah. The problem is the gift.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I want to, oh man, there's so much there's so many directions that we could go, but I think like for the second half, let's think some kind of more tactical things that people can do to start to level up. And I think it's really cool to hear from you guys that like where you started. It's crazy. So let's talk about the environment. I think a question that I want to start with is, and Jamal, I'll throw this question your way first. How does someone know if they're at the right company and the right org and the right environment to make seven figures at that company or to significantly level up their income? How do you know if you're in the right environment? How do you think about that?
It's funny you asked me that first, because for the longest time I didn't. And it's only now that I've actually, pulled myself out of that hole, the environment of working, for one company and talking with so many sellers, and kind of almost a prerequisite for doing the kind of coaching that I do is, helping people do the largest deals of their lives. So what's the use of doing a huge deal if you can't, reap the benefits from it? So you asked for some tactical stuff. So one is to really understand the value proposition, and just in terms of the comp plan. Let's get really super basic. So one of the things that you need to understand, or just read through if you're evaluating your current company, is, are there any arbitrary caps in the comp plan? Are there any massive limitations? And I've suffered from those. There have been caps, and there have been like limitations, like you can only earn so much. You can only go so far over an annual quota if you do it with one deal or one customer. And there's other things like that. There's co-selling and those kind of things. So really understand the comp plan to know, are you going to be rewarded? And typically, not always, but typically, the more mature or established a company is, the more limitations there are going to be in compensation. The earlier the company is in their maturation, the more open they're going to be, because they're hungry for any kind of revenue. But even there, you have to be careful, because a brand new startup is going to be using their sellers to do a lot of evangelizing. And so there's not as much selling as there is evangelizing in general, not in every case. So you got to kind of try to find that if you're shopping for the right environment, it generally tends to be in a place where, a company's reached, it's kind of like mid to late stage startup, almost scale up, and they're really trying to ramp. And then, the comp plan is going to make all the difference in the world. And then it comes to, what kind of team are you on? What kind of management do you have? Or are they going to be supportive? Ian and Brandon and I all talk about how much it takes a village or a small city to do the really large deals. And yes, you can do well by doing smaller, medium deals, but you're going to go through the grind, like Ian kind of described. Definitely Brandon's gone through lots of grinding in his career. So kind of the sweet spot is, find a company it's in the right level of maturation. Find a comp plan that is going to reward you for your efforts, and find a team that's going to be able to sell with you as a tribe and not just leave you as an individual.
Yeah, one thing I discovered, I think Jamal is spot on there. I was with a late stage startup selling for the first time, with enterprise brands. Enterprise brands, as this late stage startup described it, and everybody, I think, especially in the SaaS space, will describe enterprise in a different way. But I was with a company that was primarily focused on small and medium-sized businesses. They were selling iPad point of sale systems to restaurants and retailers. And I was on a team of one of two. So that was fun. I really enjoyed it. It was an enjoyable experience, but I was capping my earnings potential. The manager, the other person I was working with, he was a sort of a player coach, so to speak, because he was an active seller. Here I was somebody who could run autonomously, so he didn't have to manage me so much. But the two of us, we were definitely selling the future to these really large brands in the retail space and the restaurant space. But we didn't really have the infrastructure. If a really large brand came to us and wanted to do true due diligence, right, there wasn't the infrastructure there to support it. Having a really sharp attorney to negotiate an MSA with you, that was really tough to do. And even on the comp structure, the manager was working on, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could sort of lock in $300K for ourselves? Obviously, we've got to deliver something for that. but I knew this unicorn thing could happen of earning $1 million in software sales. So I wasn't happy, satisfied with just being limited to that. Again, that was scarcity mindset to me, inner belief system. I had grown as a professional by that point, but I was able to find a Goldilocks, as Jamal was pointing out, you got to find that Goldilocks environment for you. And I think that's something that's really important, is you got to do sort of the deep dive on yourself, defining what's really important, not just the culture and the company and the comp plan that's going to be there to support you, but even your account list, doing a deep dive on defining why you're targeting certain accounts versus arbitrarily working through an account plan. So finding that sweet spot, that's a very good tactical thing. When I made the jump from that late stage startup, I did go to a public company in LivePerson. However, I knew, and it felt like a late stage startup. So I had the cultural component that I was very accustomed to, but now I was able to access, because they were an enterprise first company as well, they had access to the legal resources that I was lacking before. They had access to the professional services that can deliver transformation to really large brands. They had the leadership and support structure to help close these massive deals. So that was like my Goldilocks opportunity to say, this can be done. 7 figures could be done in that environment. And so I offer that up as a good place for people to start when evaluating, where to go. A great tool is, I know we all know it well, RepView, because you're getting the inside track on straight from the front lines of sellers. They're going to tell you what the comp structure is, how many folks are making quota, what you can, really earn. That's a great little resource for anybody looking to level up.
Yeah, I think Jamal and Brandon said most of what needs to be said, but I worked in copiers for 10 years and I had built that business up. We were, when I left, a $60 million annual business. I had 10 sales managers and 70 AEs on my team. I was their director of sales, and I was running a $60 million business, making about $250 a year. And I read an article in Forbes magazine, and it said that the average enterprise account executive at Salesforce was making 300. And that was my aha moment, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I said, well, I'm using Salesforce. This has been part of my growth. I want to go there. And I interviewed 3 times, got rejected all 3 times, finally found someone who came from HP and was selling copiers and kind of knew that DNA. And I bring that up because one of the first things I did when I got to the company, I said, what are the top reps making here? And I learned that there was someone in Manhattan Beach near where I live who was making $1 million a year. And I, got her to lunch and talked to her about it. And I think a big part of it is going to a place where the top performers are earning 7 figures, going to a place where it's been done. If the top people are making 4 or 5, you're probably not going to come in and make $1 million, especially if they're 200 or 300% of plan. Because I have a video about this I posted about a year ago, like how to make 7 figures in sales. And one of the things I said is you have to have a comp structure where you can make that if you're hitting around 300% typically. So if you do the math and you look at your accelerators and whatever it is, you don't have to sell $10 million. You have to be 300%. Because again, if your OTE is 300K and your plan is 150, and you have a $1.5 million quota, you just have to make $4.5 million to get to that 300%. But you really want to be in that sweet spot where you do the math, work backwards. And if you can sell 300% or so, you can, get that opportunity. That is the key. I mean, that's something that's the first thing I work on with my coaching clients is like plug in their accelerator, see what they need to sell in order to make the money that they want. Know your comp plan really well and know exactly what you need to sell to be able to hit that. And I mean, that's huge. If you don't have, and the other thing is your average deal size, right? If you're trying to go to a company where the average deal size is $50,000, you're going to have to sell big deals to make big money. And so if their biggest deal is $200,000-300K, you're probably not going to make $1 million, right? You do the math. So having the right company where people are doing it, the right product that can sell to large deals to enterprise, and the right comp plan are the 3 pillars that I think you need to make 7 figures in sales.
A theme from all three of you. It sounds very simple, but knowing your comp plan inside and out and just exploring the limitations of your current comp plan. And I'm guessing that a lot of folks maybe haven't done that. And if you're trying to make more money, looking at, hey, is the environment that I'm in and just my comp structure, is that a big thing holding me back?
Yeah.
And just due to the nature of the business that we do and the type of accounts, I want to ask you guys, Jamal, I'll throw this question your way first. How, like, what would be some red flags in terms of leadership, either interviewing for a job or at your current company? What would be some of the red flags you would be thinking about that, hey, this is something that might limit my success here?
That's a great question, because so many of them. So I've definitely worked for a few managers that were less than desirable, and it's really hard to suss that out in one or two or three interviews before you get an offer, and kind of go back and forth. One red flag to me is when they start to fish around for just levels of activity. When there's a real all three of us talk about, sales is not a numbers game, it's an impact game, etc. And so sometimes a manager can really show their hand when they start, how many dials do you do, how many emails go out, what does your general day look like? Now, some of that is innocent because they just are trying to get granular on your selling reality, but you can kind of start to hear, okay, there's a theme here. And, you can start to see what's behind this is that they value activity. And that can be at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag. But on the other side of it, once you're in the soup with the manager, you're working for them, things can change dramatically relatively quickly. The first manager that I had at Oracle was the worst manager of my entire career. And he was so bad, he impacted my health. I was having nightmares, cold sweats. My self-esteem went through the floor, even though I was rookie of the year. And it was just living out of fear. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what it means to work with the big boys, right? Because I felt that was the culture that I needed to learn how to live in if I was going to thrive. And man, was I wrong. Even within Oracle, my next manager and my third manager were worlds better than that first one. But it's happened more than once. And so the other thing is how they make you feel when you're performing well and when you're not performing well. If they can give constructive criticism and help you course correct, that's a really good manager. If maybe you're doing well and not doing well, but they could still make you kind of second guess your own decisions, or maybe leave you feeling like, oh, I should have done so much more, whatever I did was insufficient, another huge red flag. So I guess the biggest message that I would have about this is that if you have a manager who's consistently making you feel less than when you're doing well or when you're not doing well, it's really time to think through, is that a place that you want to be? Because I'm here to tell you that's not in your best interest for the long term. And there are so many other selling realities that are better.
Yeah. A big red flag for me is if you're going through the interviewing process, one, you should have the confidence that it's not just the company evaluating you. You should be evaluating that company and the culture and the people, the comp structure, everything. Because this is where you're going to spend a lot of your time, a lot of your energy, and put forth a lot of attention. So it needs to be the right place for you. I like to ask a lot of why questions. Don't just tell me what's happening at that company. Tell me a little bit about the why. And it'd be a big red flag if that manager, that leader couldn't explain the reasons why they're doing the things that they're doing. The targeting of very specific strategic accounts. Well, tell me why. How did you come to that conclusion on this is the right strategy? Tell me a little bit about the why behind the comp structure. So I think it's really important to ask those why questions. You'll get, I think, a really good tell of their level of thinking. I look for systems thinkers, design thinkers. I think those are great managers to work for, is they're thinking about how to make, obviously their constituents, their true customer are their team members, right? The employees that work for them. So they should be working for them, and supporting them and helping them grow. And another good metric is to try to pull out stories about how they've helped change the life of one of their reps or two or three or more. And I think another good sign to look for is how public they are with sharing their systems, sharing their philosophy, sharing how they grow. Go to LinkedIn. If they're not talking about their culture, they're not talking about sharing, hey, here are the principles that guide me and the team. It's hard to work in that environment. And you might find yourself in a place where they're on the brink of burnout themselves because they're stressed. So I think finding those managers who are equipped and have found that balance of, hey, I publicly talk about this because it's a good thing. It's a good talent magnet, but more importantly, it's how I define my own principles so that everybody, the whole team can rally behind what we're trying to build here. I think it's a really important thing to look for.
Ian?
What I would look for in addition to the managers, because managers are really important, but in high growth companies, SaaS companies, managers often change. I had a lot of managers over my 9 years at Salesforce, and maybe you start working for someone and then they leave, they get promoted, something happens. I love to think about the culture of the company. One of the things I really loved about Salesforce is just generally there was a big emphasis on culture and giving back, environment, not so much. It was embedded in their DNA and their fabric. And you saw that from talking to people during the hiring process. You see it publicly. Just go on Glassdoor and look at the reviews massively across the companies, and companies that are the best places to work for on Glassdoor. There's a reason for it, because they take care of their people. Look at what people say. It's not only about the money. You got to be in a place where culture is strong. And I'm a big believer. If I was going to work for a company again, I would go right to like best place to work from employees. I go to the lists on Glassdoor, and not so much Fortune, but like really what are employees saying about the company? Because I mean, they're the ones who are there already. And so that was a big thing. What I did is when I talk to peers, it's not just the manager, you talk to people who work there, see what it's like and how long they've been there, look at the turnover rate, right? That'll tell you what you need to know. Because really the manager is great if you work for someone you love, but what happens when they leave? So really the long-term company, I stayed at 2 companies for 19 years because I did like the culture. I liked, the overall company. And the other thing is you got to believe in what you're selling. If you're not going to get excited about what you're selling or the mission of the company, it's going to be hard to be successful as well. So find, the manager, but also the culture and the product or service that you can get excited about and talk to customers. So a lot of factors go into it.
The company culture I'm hearing from all of you guys is incredibly important. Like the leadership, your peers, Jamal, Brandon, you guys both talked a lot about the managers, comp plan limitations, making sure that it's just an environment where this is even possible for you to make 7 figures or to significantly level up your income. Let's shift gears again, because a big part of what we're talking about today, just a reminder for anyone that's hopped in, is we're really talking about the approach behind making 7 figures. The next session, we'll talk more tactics around outbound. The session after, more tactics around selling. But a big part of this approach is the mindset of approaching executives. And every single one of you guys talked about this, and every one of you had kind of your own story, around it too. But Ian, I'll kick this question your way to get started. You talk a lot about this, and one of the things that you had mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting, you say on your website, without the right skills and strategies in place, your performance will never change, and sales will, feel like a grind. I feel like a lot of the strategies and skills, one of those big ones is being able to confidently talk to someone that is very experienced, probably more experienced than you are in terms of like their career experience. How do you think about, and what was that journey like for you? And like, I need to talk to a CEO of like a Fortune 500 company, Fortune 50 company. What was that like for you?
So a couple things. You used the word grind, and I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about what is grinding. And I think about my coffee maker. You put a bunch of beans, they're all the same, and you grind them and you get equally distributed grains of coffee. And that's kind of what grinding in sales looks like. It looks like treating everyone as a transaction, as a potential sale. And it is exhausting and it's not fulfilling. And the big shift that I think all of us made, at least that I made, was a shift from being inward focused, my goals, my quota, my commissions, me, to outward focused. Really selling is helping, selling is solving the biggest problems, selling is, truly helping companies transform. And when you're focused on helping other people get what they want, and especially at the executive level, you are going to get what you want. You're going to get the sales, you're going to get the commissions, you're going to get the big paychecks. But when you're focused only on yourself and making it about you, customers can smell that commission breath a mile away. And so really that fear is coming from ego. That fear is not from not having the skills. I was the same person in 2016 as I was in 2017 when I finished number one. The big difference is I stopped making it about me. So when talking to executives, it really is intimidating if you're thinking about what you bring to the table. But if you just leave your ego at the door and realize, you know what, hey, people are people. We all put our pants on the same way. And I'm here to help and to serve you. And it's not about me. It's about listening, understanding, having a conversation. Then that's a lot less intimidating. But when you're coming from a place of trying to impress somebody and teach them everything you know, you're already defeating yourself before you even give yourself a chance. So ego is the enemy. Truly, the best salespeople, the ones that take the time to be empathetic, to listen, to be genuinely curious because they want to help people. And that was where I was, struggling for the years I missed quota, when I realized like, hey, this isn't about me. It's about listening and helping people. And if it's meant to be and I can help them and, ultimately we're a good fit, then great. And if it's not, no worries. Like being attached to that outcome is really a source of challenge. So I think when you think about, speaking to executives, there's a few things you need to do, but, really showing them you care by getting good at listening, taking the time to research them, understand specifically, listening to their webinars or what they're speaking about, really understanding what they care about and coming in with powerful questions, a point of view, show you're really thinking about how you can help them. Like that will position you differently than other salespeople. And they see you're taking the time to really care and show up in a place of service, and they will be a lot more open. They will be a lot more receptive, and just treat them as a human. Right. And I think when we put up people on a pedestal, then we're looking up to them and they're looking down at us, and we can't see them eye to eye. And really selling is about seeing people as peers, regardless of their title or their position. Because at the end of the day, we're all people. We all have the same struggles. None of our shit doesn't stink, right? We're all humans. And so that's the key. It's a mindset of seeing people as equals and not putting someone on a pedestal. At least for me, that was a big difference in how I approach these meetings.
I eventually got to a place where I found it easier talking with, say, C-level executives. It was a long journey to get there. What I realized looking back in those moments of why is this? Why is it easier to sit across from a C-level executive and talk about, hey, how can we personalize healthcare just like Spotify has personalized music playlists? I loved talking about that. And I realized it was one big thing. I was a big thinker. I dreamed big. That was like a core principle of mine. But it was a long struggle to get there. And a couple of things really helped me. One was getting over imposter syndrome. So Ian talked about getting to that level where you can realize, hey, sales is a very human-driven, it's a very human-centric industry. And the other side of the table, it's another human being. And if we put them on a pedestal, that can create this artificial anxiety and fear that doesn't need to be there, because C-level executives, leaders of companies, they want to dream big too. They want to go after those big moonshots. And that's where the mega deals happen. It's actually where you get lost in the shuffle is at that mid-level director level inside the organization. That's when RFPs come out. that is when you're commoditized. That's when it's all about price, features, and jargon. And that's, as Jamal, I think, calls it run rate selling. That's where it's hyper competitive. It's a lot less competitive up there in the clouds. Again, to steal from Jamal, I've learned a lot from Mega Deal Secrets. You can really find it actually easier to enable that change up there, but it takes a lot, right? We're humans too, right? And somebody who didn't finish college to go talk with a Fortune 10 CEO who has an MBA for Harvard Business School, right? That can be a very intimidating thing. So I had to overcome imposter syndrome. And what I took away from that was deliberately working with an outside coach. So I got outside help. Another great tip for anybody here looking to level up. There's only so much you can do looking within. Sometimes it's really helpful getting an outside perspective. But what she helped me do, what Amber did, was helped me to rethink what my weaknesses were that I was holding on to, these things that I was attaching myself to, like introversion. Spoke up a little bit about it on LinkedIn today. For so long, I thought my introversion in an extroverted, what I thought was an extroverted world of sales, was holding me back. Whereas once I worked through this, I realized, no, actually, being a great listener, being a deep thinker, wanting to do the research and finding and uncovering insights, it's really powerful. And that helped me to kind of repurpose what I thought was a weakness into a strength. So getting over imposter syndrome is a good first step. And then you want to get yourself to that high level because it's less competitive there. Because the other thing I learned too is it can take just as long selling a $250,000 deal as it takes, if not longer, than selling the $2.5 million deal or the $25 million deal. Because when you're at that level, you're outside of a box, and talking about a deal of that size, it's going to make transformative change. That's going to pull in on people who want to lean in. If you're talking at the $250,000 level, you might stay in that box after that transaction is done. You want to elevate yourself to the transformative level.
Jamal, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you got a whole book, on this, but what are your kind of quick tips on speaking to executives? What do these people care about? What kind of learning curve did you have?
So Ian talked about the human element. Brandon talked about, leveling up and staying high and having that, the wherewithal to do the research and to come with the right message. And the third piece that I would add is most of my career, I've been in quite technical areas, usually pharma tech, like pharma R&D. And I don't know if this is a boast or if I just say it, but I'm typically the dumbest guy in the room. So from that vantage point, I always remember what I call her my North Star. The first person who I ever saw do a mega deal, her name was Marcy Akers. And back in 2007, when I was a rookie at Oracle, I was doing like $500,000 deals, $1.5 million. She was doing 20. And then the next year she did, I think, almost 30. One of the most compelling things that she ever said to me was, she said, Jamal, I am an extremely needy seller. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And she says, I need a lot of people to do most of the heavy lifting, especially in front of the executive audience. So sometimes we can level up ourselves, and sometimes we can do the research, but without that team and without those folks who are just as deep as that CEO, that SVP, the person who's been in a technical field for a bajillion years, we could give the overview, but when they start asking the second, third, fourth line of questions, you need somebody who had been wearing those boots for 30 or 40 years. And so the ability to craft a team and to do the mapping of the right people to bring with you, or in sometimes instead of you step back and become the choreographer, not the actor, the coach, not the quarterback. That's a piece that I would add. to staying high, selling above the clouds is, yes, Ian is absolutely right that we need to we can't always be looking up. We have to be, go eye to eye. Brandon's also right in terms of being able to do the research and having that message. And I would add, sometimes it's not us who would be delivering that. I could go on and on, but I think we're at time.
Oh man, this could have been a 3-hour conversation today. We are almost up on time, everyone. Before we take off, next event, we're going to get really tactical with Outbound. That's next Thursday. Make sure to show up to that. The week after that, these 3 are going to reverse engineer a really big deal that they closed. And I'm really looking forward to that. But before we take off, let us know in the chat, what was your biggest takeaway from today? What was a little nugget that you got? What did you enjoy? What piece of advice did you like? Let me know in the chat. What's a nugget that you took away from the session? Let's boost these guys' egos a little bit, okay?
For me, it was the problem is the gift. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
like that
one.
quote.
Your guys' stories and how vulnerable you guys are is something that I really admire and look up to.
It's always the gift if we
very
choose to see it that way, if we can find it, because sometimes you don't know what it is. It's not visible. It takes some digging.
Yeah.
It's easy to react and think, have a victim mindset, but everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
A lot of great
Look at all
stuff
these
coming in.
things.
It's cool to see like a common theme of vulnerability. I think this is where big things happen, is when you can be authentic and open. So it was great sharing the floor with you guys today. Appreciate it, and great that Jason. Thank you for setting this up for the whole community.
Yeah, thank you,
bet.
Jason.
Yep. Yeah, this was great, you guys. Thank you everyone for the interaction. Ian, Jamal, Brandon, we'll see you guys next Thursday. Have a good rest of your week, everyone. See
Thanks,
ya.
everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Later. Well, Brennan, take care, guys.